Hello friends, welcome to Weekly Waffle, the Sunday breakfast hobby show where I ramble for around about 15 minutes on some kind of hobby topic, freestyle, improvised and off the cuff, and then I ask you some questions about that topic so that you can get involved in the comments and we can have a good old chat about it. And this week, I'm going to try my best not to be controversial, but I have a feeling that this topic is going to be something that people are passionate about. I want to talk about contrast paints, but not just Citadel Contrast Paints. I want to talk about contrast adjacent products as well, because there are actually four versions of those products. Four. There are obviously the Citadel ones, which are called contrast paints. There are the Army Painter speed paints. There are the Scale 75 instant paints. And then there's good old traditional inks with whatever medium added to them. And I guess that's a good place to start actually, because they're not contrasty type products, aren't actually new. We've been making products like that, sort of high stain wash consistency products for like filtering and shading and all sorts of different processes. Hobbyists have been doing that for a really long time. That's not a Games Workshop invention. But what contrast did do was invent the process, the one-stop shop process, as it were, of completely painting a model using a product like that. This creates a couple of interesting things. Firstly, it has a look to it when you paint a product that way, when you paint a miniature that way with a product like that. It definitely has a look to it. If you're a fan of like Space Marines or Stormcast or anything that has a lot of flat surfaces, using those kind of products is going to give you a very... It's quite hard to get the surfaces flat. They're going to be quite blotchy. It's not to say it can't be done, but it will take you quite a lot of extra time finagling the product about getting it to do that. And, you know, kind of a lot of how these products have been marketed to us is as a time saver. So yeah, it really depends on what you're painting with them, but you're going to get a pretty specific look. Like, I don't know about you, but certainly I can identify a product that's been, a miniature, keep mixing around the words miniature and product for some reason. I can identify a miniature that's been painted with a product like that pretty immediately. And I think most people can. So as I say, kind of three major manufacturers went in on this sort of product. So Games Workshop did it first to great success. And then they were followed by Scale 75 with the instant paints, which were done through Kickstarter. And things were kind of kept, well, I don't know if they were kept quiet, but things certainly were more quiet. A lot of people just didn't seem to hear about the Scale 75 ones, which is interesting. More on that in a minute. And then most recently, Army Painter has jumped on board with the Speedpaints, which I'm they're kind of interesting to me. But of those three products, they've all kind of taken slightly different approaches. The Games Workshop ones are undoubtedly the most expensive, as is always the case with Games Workshop. For the amount that you get for your pound or dollar or euro, they're always the most expensive product. And they were first. They got to set the price. You know, you can't really be mad at them that they're the most. You can roll your eyes and be like, Games Workshop the most expensive again, surprise, surprise. But you can't really be mad at them because they were the first ones to get to it, so they kind of get that right. And the product is, if you like it, it's fine. You can't really objectively review a product like that because it gives such a look of its own. And don't get me wrong, you can obviously do a lot of other stuff with contrast. It doesn't just have to be this kind of speed paint, just get models battle ready product. You can add a bunch of stuff on top of it. The thing is, for me, what I find a bit weird is that the amount of stuff you have to add on top of it to get a nice, you know, high-end, well-rendered paint job, something comparable to what you would do with traditional paints. The amount of extra stuff you have to do to contrast style products to get to that point, then why buy a special product just for that? Because paint already exists that you can do that with. So that's what's kind of weird to me. Like, why learn to work with a new product? Why spend all the money buying into a full range of a new product to then go and add a bunch of, you know, highlights and glazing and metallics and all sorts of other stuff going on with it to produce an end product that's comparable to what you would have got if you just used normal paint. And so I guess when they first came out, I was kind of a bit confused about the point of them. And I guess it's because I looked at them that way. To me, if you just want a quick battle ready, get it on the table, then you're not really holding, I presume, you're not really holding yourself to like a super high standard with how the models look. So, I don't know, again, I feel like I question whether contrast is actually quicker. Because if you're kind of not trying to particularly hold yourself to a massively high standard, just a little bit of clever working will get you something that's really quick using traditional paints. And again, you don't have to buy a whole new product and use a whole new set of techniques in order to do that. So I don't know, I feel like I was the wrong person. You know, if contrast paints were made for me, they were obviously a mistake, because I don't really get them, and I don't. It's not from ignorance. I own some. I've extensively tried them. I've done stuff with them, given them a fair chance. You know, they've been out quite a while now. And I even bought some of the Scale 75 ones more recently, and I'm also considering picking up some of the Army Painter ones, because I'm committed to this idea of continuing to find out about these products and see if what other people love about them is actually in any way transferable to how I like to paint. But yeah, so Citadel came along first, then Scale, then Army Painter, and they all took different approaches. Citadel's was a big broad range of colours. It was very expensive, but there were also a bunch of tutorials that came along with it. They put tons and tons of tutorials up on their YouTube channel showing you how to use it. So, you know, it was pretty clear what it was for from the word go. Army Painter, pretty good colour range again. Not as big as Contrast Paints as far as I recall from what I saw, but much cheaper, which is great. Good. That's what Army Painter tend to do. They tend to, you know, say, here's a thing that another hobby company does. We're going to try and do it cheaper. That's sort of their thing. And I suspect there'll probably be quite a few tutorials coming, because a lot of people seem really hype about the Army Painter ones. I guess because they're cheap. I guess that's what's got people excited about them. Then we had the Scale 75 ones, and the Scale 75 ones were a bit of an oddity because they weren't particularly cheap. The colour range wasn't massive. And the look that they produce is quite different to both the Citadel and the Army Painter ones. It's different because A, it's a matte finish. The Citadel and the Army Painter ones, the main thing, the actual biggest thing I don't like about them is that they're glossy as hell. It really bugs me, because when they're that glossy, I then have to varnish over them afterwards because I can't stand that level of gloss. I personally find it really unattractive to look at. Again, that's a me thing. That's my idea of aesthetics. But I then have to varnish over them. Problem is, you varnish over a product like that, it really accents the blotchiness from, you know, the method of putting it on. The blotches look even more blotchy. So for me, that's one of the main reasons that I actually really never use them. And so that also meant that I was really intrigued by the Scale ones, because they're much matter. And they're also less saturated, which means you can control the saturation through building up a couple of layers, which I preferred the idea of. The GW and the Army Painter ones both suffer, in my opinion, again, from also being far too saturated, that unless you buy specifically their medium to thin it down, you can't thin it with water. It ruins it. It messes up how it settles and makes it go even blotchier still. So you have to use their medium, which is another extra product you have to buy. And if, with how saturated they are, I would be diluting them all the time, which means I'd be going through buckets of that medium. So again, as a value proposition for me, for the way I would use them, for the way I paint, for what I like, terrible. Scale 75 ones aren't like that. They're already lower in saturation, so that you can build up multiple coats. This allows you to do gradients with them. It allows you to set saturations how you want it. So that really intrigued me, and I'm still having a little play with them. I'm not fully at a point of verdict with them. I suspect I'm not gonna use them much. But you know, they're another inky-like product for any applications where I do need an inky-like product. And I know that I can trust them to not go too glossy, so that's pretty great. Another thing to mention is airbrush applications where contrast, inks, most products tend to go matter through an airbrush. Just the way the airbrush lays them down tends to take some of the gloss off of them. And that can make a lot of those products a lot more useful. And one of the things I do use contrast paints for is, because it's such a broad range of colours, there's often a colour that I can get in a contrast paint that's a bit harder to find as an ink. You know, something like a cyan or, you know, a tealy sort of colour. You can find it as an ink, it's going to be a bit harder to find. Whereas in a contrast paint, there's the, can't remember what it's called, and I'm trying to look over and read the pot from here and I'm far too far away from it, but you know the one I mean, that pretty tealy turquoisey kind of coloured one. So, you know, the existence of stuff like that is cool. That's really handy. So definitely are uses for them. But the reason it's so interesting to me as a topic is because they're so irrelevant to me as a product, by and large. That's a really narrow corner case where I would use them over inks, that one specific thing. But in general, I just don't really use products like that. I like to use traditional solid paints, and that's what I prefer to work with. So I want to know who you, as we come up to the end of the episode, who you think won the contrast war. Citadel undoubtedly released the most popular product, but that's because they're part of Games Workshop that has the broadest reach. So purely on popularity alone, I don't know if we can measure that as the sole factor of their success. The Army Painter ones look set to be almost as popular as the Games Workshop ones, and Army Painter are a far smaller company. So that's interesting. The Scale ones really dared to be different, but in doing so, maybe created a narrower audience for themselves. There's been far less rave about those ones. So who won the contrast war? Is it GW by making an expensive but popular product and backing it up with lots of tuition? Is it Army Painter who captured the hearts, as it were, of the community by releasing a product cheaper, by marketing it in such a way that made it really appealing? Or was it Scale 75 for daring to do it differently? And more importantly than that, do you use these products? Do you like these products? Which brand of the three main ones do you prefer, or do you prefer to home make them yourself? I want to hear your thoughts in general on these products, because it's pretty hard for me to relate. I don't fully understand them. I don't really get why they exist, and I don't really get why I would want them. So tell me what you think of them instead. Let's talk about these contrast type paints down in the comments below. As usual, folks, don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. New video coming out Wednesday. And if you really want to support me and help, you know, keep the lights on and other, you know, the YouTuber things, then there is a Patreon link in the description as well. I'd really appreciate it if you would check that out, as well as some affiliate links, that kind of thing. So thank you so much, folks. I will see you next week. Let's talk about contrast paints. Bye-bye for now.